Welcome to this brand new chapter where we get to learn a little bit more about making interactive websites and landing pages. So this one's exciting because scroll activated animations are just a foundation. They're a staple of modern web development and front-end development specifically. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can do it the vanilla JavaScript way, which is dealing with the intersection observer API. But we're not going to do that because we're going to be using GreenSock. And that's why this course is really heavily focused around GreenSock, because it really is the tool set for modern UI animations and interactions. And it just simplifies the process of making scroll activated animations so much easier just through a single object with a few properties compared to doing it the vanilla JavaScript way. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this chapter. There's an amazing amount of flexibility with ScrollTrigger. And we're going to, in this video, just take a look at a very simple example, even though the example itself is actually pretty impressive, visually speaking. But to get to where we want to be with ScrollTrigger, it doesn't take that much work. It's just a few properties. So let me show you what we're going to do. Right here, we see this layout. This is what I created real quickly just for this particular example. And you might find this type of layout like in a certain section of a landing page or something like that. Maybe when you scroll down, you'll see a section interesting like this. Okay, so let's say without any type of animation applied to it, this is what it looks like in the browser. Yeah, pretty much exactly, almost exactly as you saw in the Figma prototype design. So we have an empty section up here. There would be maybe like a hero section. We scroll down here. We see this section. Obviously, there's no animation. And then down here, I have added an extra area of white space so that we can also experiment with what happens when we scroll back up to animations. And we'll see in later videos here in this chapter about how we can control when we enter back into the scrollable area with ScrollTrigger. So let's take a look though at the end result of what we're going to get to at the end of this particular video right here. So I decided to make the background of this portion, like the hero section, a different color just so that we can see when this ScrollTrigger starts to activate. So we scroll down, look at that. I love it. It's just so fun to be able to do this sort of thing. Now right now it doesn't replay, it doesn't restart, it only happens one time. And that's with a very basic setup of ScrollTrigger, which is what we're going to do. But don't worry, here in a couple lessons, or maybe the next lesson, we're going to make it so that when we scroll back up this way, it'll do the animation again, or it'll start to reverse it. You have so much control. It's very fun. So enough talking. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this actual project looks like so far. So make sure you open up the appropriate before folder for this lesson. And this is what the HTML file looks like. Sorry about that. I have people texting me. Quality control, not much a thing here. Anyhow, so I'm going to talk about the HTML real quick, just to show you what's happening here. If I scroll up or zoom up here, we will see that we have an empty section. This is 100 viewport height. All three of these sections in CSS. So that means it consumes the entire viewport height. We have a class of middle so that we could target that specifically as the selector for the ScrollTrigger. Very important. Then we just have, we're using that mask technique right here just to reveal, and that's how we're choosing to show the text and hide it. I'm going to show you though, maybe in another chapter, some really cool text effects. They're exciting, but I can't show you that just yet. But for now, this is going to work just fine. And we can see we have our card, and we have the other card that's off to the right. Nothing too exciting happening here. And if I save this, let's go back to our SAS file. We'll see if you want to real quickly just kind of go over what's happening here. You're free to do that, but it's really not pertinent to the purpose of this tutorial. Again, if your skills are weak with HTML and CSS specifically, make sure to watch the CSS course. Take that course. That's a part of designcourse.com as well. And you'll be leveling up no time in understanding, much of this process. So what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and get started. So if you save this right now and you right click, open with live server, make sure you're watching the SAS file so that any changes you make here will be reflected in the browser. And at this point, we can't allow that to keep happening. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this phone right here, and we're going to go ahead and reduce the volume. Okay. So let's get started. The first thing that we have to do is we're going to create a timeline. And there's multiple ways, like I said before, to initialize a scroll trigger. And so here's one way of doing it. So we're going to do what we've been doing before. I'm going to make this a little bit larger. We're going to say const.tl for timeline, gsap.timeline. We've done this before. We're going to open this up in an object. We're not going to use defaults yet. And what we're going to do is say ScrollTrigger. Now, of course, my predictive GitHub Copilot is coming up with some of the properties and spoiling the fun, but this is how you create a scroll trigger. So you simply take scroll trigger right here. You got this little colon there, and we open it up into an object. All right, so this object accepts a few required parameters. So one of those required parameters is the trigger itself. So scroll trigger. What is triggering the animation that's about to occur on this timeline? Like what element? Which div element or HTML element will trigger? All right, so that's very important. For us, we want all of our animation to occur within this section of class middle right here. So that's what we're going to say. Our trigger is going to be trigger, that's the name of the property, and the value is middle. Now that is the simplest way of defining a scroll-based animation or interaction of some sort. Just having trigger and middle, or the selector, which happens to be middle. So let's just see what this looks like. What we can do now is we can say timeline from, and we'll say card 1, we'll say X, or let's do Y, like let's do 200 pixels. So this is a very simple example. Now we're using timeline, so remember the timeline has a scroll trigger attached to it, so this has meaning on when this is going to occur. For instance, if I remove this and we save it and we go back up here, we're not going to see anything because the animation has already occurred. So if I go in the middle of the page and then refresh, it's just going to happen no matter what, no matter where we're at, even if we don't see it, all right? So let's add that back and let's see what happens now. We're going to go back, and if I refresh, while we're here, we can see it works just like it was before. However, if I refresh when we're at the top, and I scroll down fast enough, you're going to see that animation. Let's try that again. It simply means when you don't have a start and end value, which we're going to do in a second for the scroll trigger, whenever that element, the instant it comes into the viewport, it is going to animate. And it's hard to see because it's a fast animation. What if we slowed it down though? Duration, 3 seconds. Now we're going to have time to see it when we scroll down. So if I refresh, scroll down, there it goes. So what if we wanted to have more control on when exactly this animation starts? That's when the start and end properties come into play. So let's do this. In the start and end properties, they work very similar. Obviously, one deals with when the animation is going to start and one deals with when the animation is going to end. But they both are kind of structured around two strings that you define for this property. So start, you can see we have GitHub Copilot suggesting some weird values, but you can see there's two values. There's top, there's bottom top. What does that mean? Okay, so let's say for instance, we say we want our particular example to have a top and a middle. So what does this mean? What do these two values mean? Okay, so this basically means that top is in relation to the top of whatever element you defined as the trigger, all right? So top of the trigger, all right? Think of that. That's what that first value means. The second value, like middle, has to do with the scroll position in the viewport. Now, if you don't know what that means still, there's a great property that we can turn on. It's a Boolean value, true or false, that will show us physical markers on the web page. And that's for the purpose of debugging and just fine-tuning your animations. So if I save this without turning that on though, we're going to see something a little bit different than before. If we scroll down, we scroll down, we scroll down, up, look at that. It started then. Very interesting. So we go down, middle, up. There we go. So this all will make a little bit more sense when we turn on markers. So let's add markers, true. Save it. We're going to go back. Now we see this weird stuff up here. And you can't even really, if I zoom up, you can't read it because a few things are being overlapped. Because we also haven't defined an end trigger as well. But you're going to see when we scroll down, we can see it says start, 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 up. Once start in scroller, this actually says start in green right here. It's hard to see. When they meet is when the animation occurs. So let's try that again. There you go, and it starts. Let's define an end value as well. So our end value, let's say it'll be the bottom. The animation will end when the bottom of the trigger, which is this middle class, reaches the center of the viewport. Let's save it, and now let's see what happens to those markers. So if I scroll down, we can now see our scroller end is down here. They're not overlapping anymore, and once they intersect, the start and the scroller start right here. Go there, it goes, and now it starts. Okay, so this might be confusing right here where it says start and end. What is that relation to? Well, this is actually the start, the very top of the middle element, the section element, and this is the very bottom of it. So for instance, if I can help you visualize that, if I uncomment this code here in the section rule set, we can now see start is exactly at the start right here, and end is exactly at the very bottom of that target element, the DOM element. You can adjust these when they start however you wish. So you'll see how these end up moving. So for instance, if we want to have start move down perhaps like 20%, all we have to do is come over here and just say 20% of start, and guess what? It's right here. This affects the timing of your animation. If you want it to start sooner, then we could say negative 20%. And guess what? It's above it by 20%. And now the animations are going to start sooner. So if I refresh, oops, sorry, I don't think I actually refreshed it. There we go. So if I refresh, it's going to start sooner. So that's how you can have some control. And of course, by the way, you could do the same thing for the scroller start and the scroller end by adjusting the end values right here as well. So let's keep this at top. And then we're just going to say 20% for that value. And then for this value, we're just going to say bottom, center. I think that's just fine right there. By the way, you can also do interesting things like this. So I could say bottom plus equals 20%. So that means that the end value, the little red label that says end, it will say, it'll find the bottom of the element, the trigger element, which happens to be middle, and it'll go 20% past that. All right, so if I save that and I go back, we check this out, we'll see that it's 20% past right here. Now, the end values have relevance if we transition or change this scroll trigger to a scrub value. Now, what is that? So we're going to get into scrub specifically in another video, but I'm going to show you just real quick. I'm going to turn on scrub. It's a Boolean value. It can actually accept some other values as well, but for now, we're just going to put true. By default, it's on false, and watch what happens. It is an animation that is no longer tied to time. Rather, it is tied to the scroll position. So it doesn't just initiate an animation that then takes X amount of seconds based on your duration. It's just based on time. And so these can be very cool, especially when you use a smooth scroll plugin called Linus or any other ones, which we'll get into later. So it's just all about what type of aesthetic that you're looking for. For us, we're not going to get into scrub-based animation yet, but I just wanted to plant that seed right now, so we're going to take that off. So at this point, you should have a pretty decent understanding of roughly kind of what's happening with these start and end values. So we're just going to take off markers. We don't need those anymore. And now what I want to do is start actually defining our animations. So for us, for the animations, we're going to keep this pretty simple. We're going to open up an array for this first argument for the selectors. And we're going to say, we're going to have our H2, which is the big softened title to the left. We also are going to take our H3, which is the 2 card titles, and then the paragraph titles as well. And what we're going to do, all 3 of these, by the way, are wrapped in masks, which is overflow hidden. And that's just one of the many animation techniques that we can use. We're going to get some cooler sort of animation techniques later on for type specifically. For now, this will work though. So we're going to say Y% 140. Why 140? Because the paragraph element was 2 lines, and so that's what I had to do. We had to make this beyond 100% just to push them all off. We'll also stagger these because we're selecting more than one element right here, so we can stagger those with a value maybe just very subtle of 0.1 seconds. So let's go ahead and refresh. We're going to come back down. Look at that. So they all come in just like that, and they're activated, of course, based on the scroll trigger. Now let's go ahead and chain another one. So we're going to say from, and we're going to say card 1. And you know what? Let's actually open this up in a... Actually, no. For now, we're going to leave it just like this, and we're going to tackle that other thought in a second. We're going to say scale Y. The card, by the way, is the... Oh, okay. I was doing something kind of slow, and I'm sorry about that. What we're going to do is we don't want to take the whole card right here, card 1 and card 2, and transform that. We want to take the box specifically. So what we can do is just say box, scale Y. I'm sorry, the code on my reference monitor was wrong, and that's why it was kind of tripping me up there. So scale Y is going to be 0. We're going to take our ease. We're going to give this kind of like an elastic type of easing or animation. So 1 and 0.5 here. Again, remember, you can just type in GSAP eases in Google and find the eases page that I've already talked about. And we'll make the duration 2 here. Let's just see what this does. This isn't the end state. So let's refresh, come back. Okay, so that's kind of cool. But let's make it all occur at the same time, or at least, you know, maybe not exactly the same time. So let's try initially making it occur at the same time with the less than value here for the offset. So if we refresh, all right, that's very cool. Refresh again, come down. Very, very cool. Let's go ahead and take off and uncomment that. And if we want a slight offset, we could say minus equals maybe like 0.3. See what that what that does exactly. Refresh. So there's a slight delay. We can also stagger them because there's 2 that it found because we have 2 box elements. So we could do like 0.3. Refresh. All right, very, very, very cool. So hopefully you can now see with a very basic setup how the scroll trigger works in a very simplistic and basic sense. There's a lot more things we could do. For instance, like what if when we get past a certain point, we want it to animate out in reverse? What if when we come back here, we want it to animate in again? What if we go scroll back up and we come back, we want it to animate yet again? So we're gonna get into that, which is called toggle actions, in the next video.